Okay. Then the numbers are changing. Note that the numbers are always changing, or if the whole thing is blank. Okay. Okay, we're going to have just one of these, so we're not going to be able to show both.
Mhm.
So only one of these we'll use.
Okay.
So if you want to, that is when we want to show other people, you've got to rotate the one that you want to rotate.
Okay.
And it's fine to use that one as the main one, and then this is a backup.
Yeah. Sounds good.
But we're not having two. We can't combine the two.
Yeah. sounds
Okay.
good. Yeah.
Campiness, the title of the course, and how and why these kinds of things come together. Urban innovation, I've been teaching for years, decades. It used to be from 1945 until the date is a very feted, celebrated, criticized, and argued over. When did the taxpayers' revolt end and transform the continual economic growth of much of the Western world from after World War II until when? Well, This is what I used to teach courses on, and I did a book called City Money, and things like this were central for that. We didn't talk about aesthetics. We didn't talk about the arts. We didn't talk about these things at all of campiness. Things changed about 20 years ago. Robert Putnam, who knows the most famous book of his? Bowling Alone. You know anybody read the book? What's he say?
We discussed it in class before, but it's like the dying of the death of the space in America where individuals can go and collaborate outside of, and sort of hang out with their friends outside of work or, I guess, at home.
Bowling Alone. So the bottom line of the bigger point of the title or of the book, I don't quite see how it fits with what you said.
Isn't it that there used to be these bowling clubs that people would go to and be with their friends, and then those bowling clubs sort of died, and then there's not this new space in America anymore that exists for that?
Okay, there we go. So when you say new space, so you mean it in a metaphorical sense, that they no longer are bowling as a team. When he was a kid, they were teams. They may have had a T-shirt or something which would match. They would, as a team, they would either bowl against each other, or they may compete against other teams and the like. It was fun. It was exciting. They drank beer, perhaps, and they had snacks during the session. He went back a decade or two later. He was back in his hometown and went to the bowling leader and said, "How's business today?" "Terrible." "Really? Why? What's the problem?" "People are bowling alone. They don't eat, they don't drink, they don't have fun and talk and stay on and celebrate." And so what he then took from this is civic organizations are dying. And why is this critical for America or for the world? Most famous was the book by Alexis de Tocqueville. You all know that, called Democracy in America. And what's at least the bottom line that Putnam takes from Tocqueville and celebrates this? What's the quick point of departure you all probably know or should know? Okay. I'm adding this is general education. not for any single major, not for any single subfield, but general education. Talk about why is America different from other countries? And in his case, Tocqueville, his country, France. Why is France totally different? And from Europe at the time, around 1840, 1830, 1820, there was no democracy much in Europe. There was a lot emerging, and so the Europeans wanted to say, well, you know, what's going to happen to us if we had a little revolution in France, certain kind of revolution, and they have something else. What's it like over there? Okay, what was his quick, the most celebrated simple example that people talk about for a word or a couple of words? Citizens. And what do citizens do that make them different from France? Or from Germany, or from Austria, and England at the time? Civic organizations, most visibly in the U.S., which were distinctive then and now, whole lots of little Protestant SECTS, little churches of different branches, hundreds of them, Jehovah's Witnesses, all kinds of things named after an individual minister who may named a church after him. There may be no other church except that one in the whole world, but that is, they're not part of Catholic or Baptist or Episcopalian or whatever else. And those things lead to people participating and taking what's more seriously in the words of that minister in that church and what they believe in. Whereas if you're all in a Catholic country and you're all told to do what the Pope and the Vatican says, you do that, maybe nobody pays so much attention, and it's in Latin, and not everybody knew Greek or Latin, etc. Okay. This in turn, what's the impact? The impact, the bottom line for Putnam and for Tocqueville was, because people talk with one another, they build legitimacy in the relationship. They see the church as a good place, and I follow the leader because I feel that's my person to follow. Or it's what I want to do in my own heart of hearts, is the idea. Instead of saying someone is there with a gun or patriarchal, white, old, okay, person, the idea is civic engagement and participation, including the Lions Club, the Boys Club, the League of Women Voters. These things build a different kind of society. Okay. So what's the title of the book? If you don't bowl as a group, maybe this has implications. And that's his shouting ever since. And people talk about this. This is the cause of the election of Donald Trump. We no longer have a sense of civility, of engagement, of participation. And Trump can capture that better than others to get a few more votes. Okay, that's the big interpretation, which is the critical bigger story, but where and how much support is there for this interpretation? Okay, well, here's another interpretation. Can Tocqueville karaoke? We'll read this in the weeks to come, but what's the point? In Bowling Alone, Putnam has lots of data on lots of stance. I can see. Yeah, I have to go back and forth between my notes, and I can see you as well. Okay, we knew about the result. I had a collaborator, did a PhD in the Netherlands, Peter Achterberg, And he said, let's try to figure out what's going on. This bowling alley doesn't make sense. So he came here to Chicago. We spent the summer digging through different kinds of surveys, reading whatever we could find, and so forth. And we said, well, here's an idea. Let's say Putnam really puts all these data together and finds that people are participating less. If you give them a long list, are you a member of the Lions Club or a youth group or of a church or of a union? And then the number of these things he would often count. And it could be 0 or it could be 1, 2, or more than that. So then we said, what if people are union members only, or church members only? Or that is to look at whether and how these things work differently for different kinds of participation. So we ran the data with them. And Putnam was generally right. There's been a decline over time, over roughly the last 30 years or so, 1960s to the end of the 20th century. There's one huge exception. What was that? Anybody guess? What might be going up when everything else is going down? We did not have this hypothesis at all. I was writing books on city money. Community power. Power, money. Isn't that what we're talking about? What are people joining by their choice? What kind of organization do they want to? Did more people increase joining? And young people were especially the people who made the difference. Yes?
Internet?
Yes, but Putnam then and forever after hates the internet and doesn't ask any questions about it. Okay. So, but you're right. But nevertheless, that doesn't tell us the type of content that is like a League of Women Voters or a Boy Scouts or a union. Anybody else want to add something or make a guess? I haven't mentioned the true answer yet, just to see if anybody, because we had no idea about this either. But I'm mentioning, holding this up as the answer. The answer was arts and culture. The arts and culture, jazz groups, stand-up comedy, ballet, painting, rock, all kinds of music, popular music, hip-hop, house, etc. Gospel, Christian gospel, Christian rap, combinations like those. These people, and then they write lyrics within these, and they take these where I live, I lived most of my adult life, the whole time I've been here at the university. I've never lived in Hyde Park. I lived in Bronzeville, and man, we talk different. The people may not show up when it's time to work, but they write a lot of lyrics, and they make new tunes, they make new melodies. It's serious. What difference does it make if people are participating in the arts? Then you start to read a little more about what kind of arts, and so we get to things like Susan Sontag, because arts and clothes, perfume, football uniforms that you may wear when you go to a game. You may wear the the outfit of your hero out on the field. You want his same number or same name and so forth. You see a whole lot of these. All these. Then when you go afterward, if you're on the north side, contrast, we have two baseball teams, the Cubs and the White Sox. The White Sox are right next to IIT and they're right near Bronxville. There are almost no clubs there afterward. The north side, what's it like up there? You've been there around the Cubs neighborhood. Who's been there? How many of you have been around the Cubs stadium or anywhere nearby? Okay, one. Anybody else? Two. Three, maybe. Okay, four, five. So, okay, what's distinctive about the Cubs stadium, and why are people there in contrast to the White Sox area?
It's more integrated into the city. Right?
Integrated in what sense?
Into the city blocks. Like, I feel like the White Sox stadium isn't really within a neighborhood.
Are we still passing around any masks, or what happened to our little boxes? Okay.
We're out of minutes.
They're out of there? Okay, then I'll dig over here. But go ahead and keep, tell us a little more. Integrated. Integrated is a little bit brief. What else can you say? That is, what kind of food, what kind of drink, what kind of conversation, perhaps? Actually, let me just pass down that. Anybody? Look at the menu. Go there with a bike up there, drive up there, take a bus up there. Is the menu the same? About 5 blocks further east toward the lake is a different neighborhood called Boys Town. What's different in the menu if you just look outside in Boys Town compared to the Cubs Stadium neighborhood? At the Cubs Stadium, they have hot dogs, hamburgers, beer, French fries. You go 5 blocks east, and they have vegan oysters with a special sauce, Japanese mixed with Australian fruit on top. Drastically different food, which is marking and trying to symbolize a different lifestyle. And what she's writing about, when she had one reference to an Englishman at the end of the 19th century who was very famous because he was gay and he took on the surrounding world, and he talked about it, and he was sentenced to go to jail, etc. So it was just the beginnings of that kind of stuff. And she had I won't try to elaborate, but she said in part, campiness may be a gay aesthetic. Okay. Does she mean literally? Not necessarily, but that gay culture sometimes can have more of a stress on the aesthetics of what she's writing about. That is, that kind of sensitivity in the way she talks about feeling, acting, mixing, matching, not matching, and matching and clashing, etc. Those kinds of things are not what you have if you're having a hot dog, a hamburger, and a beer, or maybe 3 beers. Whereas at the other place, if you have oysters with a little bit of Japanese fruit or something or other, there may be no alcohol at all. Maybe a little bit of wine. Okay. Who cares about all this stuff? Does it make any difference? Aha. big items in the last few summers when there have been big concerts touring around the world. There've been stories by business magazines which will say the contribution to the GNP is added by 2 movies and 2 concert tours. That is, these are drivers of the GNP. At least people are trying to estimate and claim that. This is what the course is about. Why and how did these things change? That is, I didn't invent this, but most of my colleagues, that is, I would say, guesstimating, 90% of my colleagues in the social sciences don't say a word about this. They don't have a clue about this. They don't think about it. They don't notice it, and they certainly don't publish it or teach it, even though it's going on. And who's adding this? I mean, where does it come from? Young people, probably more highly educated. She talks a little bit about it elsewhere and so forth, but it's who are people who are sensitive to the kinds of things she's writing about there, and where and how might there might be from the University of Chicago, thinking as she did, and other people who look for irony and enjoy celebrating things which have this kind of asking you to think about it a second time. How much are we finding this in other places, and where and why, and how does this fit with other things? Okay, that's where we begin to get to urban innovation. Urban innovation, we talked about for 50 years, 100 years. There have been urban innovations, but to feature and celebrate the arts like this in American cities and in English cities is new. On the continent, you found much earlier sensitivity to the arts and culture. We'll talk about that a little bit, but the quick bottom line is that Habermas published a book, his big doctorate, and said, we studied carefully what did people read and what kinds of newspapers, what kind of magazines would they have, place that you could read for free if you were in a coffee shop, so-called, in England, or a cafe in France or Italy. What kind might you see in a cafe or in France or Italy? Basically, would it be science or politics or literature? Yes. Bottom line is literature. If you're in a London coffee shop, would you see science, politics, or literature? All 3 of them. And for several hundred years, all 3 could be there. When you go to Seoul today, which city in the world has more cafes than any city in the world? Seoul, Korea. How many cafes do they have in Seoul 30, 40 years ago? 0. This is very new in Asia. So Asia is a big test for lots of things we think about in the West as normal. If they don't do it that way, but the economic growth is twice as fast in Korea and in China and in Singapore and Japan in the past, what are they doing that things are so much more successful in terms of economic growth? And what theories or bits of evidence do we have about economic growth in the West? It's a big, big issue. And why does it fail in Asia? And a lot of these things that I'm talking about here from historically failed in Asia. There are more how many Koreans, anybody here Korean? Anybody read about it? What, do Koreans join more frequently, less, or the same as in the US in terms of civic organizations or churches or clubs or anything like that? What would you think? More, same, or less than in, say, the US? Silence. The answer is many Koreans are much more often and do more often join civic organizations and especially churches. Do they have one kind of church? Protestant? No, they have 4 big kinds of types of churches. They have Buddhist, Confucian, Catholic, and then the 4th they call Protestant, but it's pretty much evangelical Protestant, as we have in Bronzeville generally. Does it build? If you look at Koreans who some have more, you ask them a question: do you trust your neighbors? Do you trust your friends? Do you trust the political leaders? And these days, they've had. I mean, in the last 3 months, how many presidents have they had in Korea, or prime ministers? How many have been arrested? They bring in their own private militia practically to fight, and they don't get arrested, etc. I mean, they're having a lot of battles about what's legitimate right now in Korea. So, if they have all these civic organizations and all these churches, why don't they have legitimacy? The big finding of a PhD here by Seoko Kim, who's a grad student, was to analyze the data, and he found that does membership in more organizations increase as you look across a national sample of 1,500 or so forth. Korean citizens, the answer was 0. There's no impact on having organizational membership in terms of your holding a sense of legitimacy about political leadership, your friends, or whatever. Whereas in the U.S., people who are members of more organizations. This is Putnam's big finding. It's not, I mean, it's not original. This is Tocqueville. But Putnam reiterates and shows that this is still the case. And it's true if we look at Northern Southern Europe, it works in Northern Europe. That is, Northern Europeans who are more active in, just careful of the white wine. The Northern European Protestant Europeans are more often in civic organizations, and those are more active in terms of legitimacy. If you ask these same questions that we ask, these are now being repeated, these questions all around the world. How much trust do you have in the president? How much in the national army? How much in the police, your local police? How much in, business? How much in your church, etc.? You ask people in the U.S. and people, about 50% of people say they trust many of these. But it's been going down. That's Putnam's finding. You ask people in Germany, it's about the same as the U.S. You ask Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and what do they say? About 90% trust each other. Very different. You go to Italy or to southern Italy, what do you get? 20%. If you go to Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, what do you find? What would you guess?
Same amount.
Same as which? We're getting very different results.
20%? The 20%?
About more like 10%. It's less than in Italy, often, in much of Latin America. Just to add quickly though, what if you ask the people in Brazil, don't trust each other, ask them, how happy are you? Are you happy? Are you very happy someone? Just a simple question like that. Happiness items, these are now used all the time too. The Brazilians are very happy. The people in Mexico are very happy. But they don't trust each other. There are very interesting differences in where and how these things work, and why we have different dynamics for trust, legitimacy, paying your taxes, or fighting your taxes, going to court, and so forth. The simple point I'm trying to make with the multiple examples, multiple countries, multiple contexts, is that these are important for all the social sciences, and being an active citizen or paying attention to the citizenship kinds of implications of that. And I'm more conscious of this, and I've stayed there in part because it is distinctly different in Bronzeville from especially Hyde Park. And this is one reason I came here is that I came here with a PhD because this was the leading center in the world for studying cities. And people come here through the 20th century and in economics, political science, sociology, and so forth, anthropology. Chicago has attracted people to study cities. In many ways, they'd say, it's terrible. It's the worst place in the world. Max Weber came here in 1892. He came for the World's Fair, and he had some German-American relatives, and so he'd visit them in the American South, around New York, and so forth. And he came here and said, "Wow, Chicago is like a man with his skin cut off. You can see the insides more openly than you can in Europe or elsewhere." Okay. Related, or part of that, is you go from one neighborhood. As I've illustrated with going from the Cubs Stadium to Boys Town, within 5 blocks, or if you go from between the two baseball teams, dramatic different rules of the game. They have different views of the world. Not always, not 100%, but there are things which make a real difference. And with some people, if you look more closely, you can begin to see how and when. So then the classic, what's the classic way of labeling and making sense of these in Chicago? Neighborhoods. What kind of adjective might you talk about that makes, why is, so you may have the name like Hyde Park or Bronzeville, but what's the label behind that which makes it distinctive? Yes. Outside of what?
South.
South side. Okay. But what does good? But what does good mean for many persons who use that, in addition to being geographically south? What's the difference between south side and north side? We are also deliberately looking not to be quote, politically correct, but we're trying to understand what do they do and then why. Okay, you got a hand up?
I think they have different demographic, like, information, so probably they have different, like, occupation, or different, like, lifestyle, so if you're living in South Side, you need to, like, take the bus going to the downtown area or whatever to work, but for someone in the North Side, the economic activity is different.
Okay, geography, public transportation. Yes,
Social perception,
but pull your mask a little bit down when you, and then speak a little louder so we can hear it, okay?
social perception,
Social perception, but more specifically.
and stereotypes about the South
Yeah,
Side.
I mean, exactly, but I'm trying about what's in the stereotype.
It's dangerous.
Dangerous, there we go, now we're getting closer. What else?
Income level.
Income level, okay, so it's implied that they're poorer people on the south side. And maybe that's the cause of the danger? Poor people are more dangerous?
Yeah, there are many different factors that contribute to that. So, yeah, that can be part of them. Yeah.
Okay. I'm nudging to try to say, I mean, crime is an excellent example because it's very complicated. There are many strong stereotypes, one of which is what drives people is their money or their lack of it. And if they're poor, then they steal. And therefore, being poor is a source of crime. And that's been a widespread view for hundreds of years. It's been tested now, and it's often zero. Okay. Sometimes, that is, if you get certain kinds of data, it can work out that way. But if you look a little more closely, then it can fall to zero. So I don't want to go down that path too far. But the simple point I'm trying to make, I'm amused, at least so far. Yeah, how many of you have lived in Chicago more than 5 years? I say, just hold your hand up high. Are you the only one? Nobody's lived more than 5. Okay, so that's how many of you lived here no more than when you've been here in the university? You've been here before the university. So 1, 2. Okay, but this is typical. I mean, it's even more typical than usual in having nobody's from Chicago. I know him very well. Been in other courses, etc. But the simple answer is ethnicity. Chicago's defined and articulated by I'm a Pole, or I'm an Irishman, or I'm an Italian, or I'm black. In Bronzeville, we are black. Okay. Black power, black music, black lifestyle, etc. Where and how these things have been, and why are Chicago so different from, let's say, Los Angeles, Palo Alto? And the one crude answer is, let's say historically, the Los Angeles, it was a desert. It was only they figured out how to dam the water and take the water from the rivers to get over to irrigate the LA area. Then it took off as a city. The U.S. military had been there, and they were basically white Protestant Southerners with a sense of pride and a military style, and no Japanese, no Chinese, no blacks, no Poles, that is, they were white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. the, I'm smiling as I'm thinking about India and what I would say. So that is, I'm pausing for a second to say, I've tried for decades to try to have at least some teaching assistant who is not from the U.S. and ideally from places who are not Europe. And so having from our teaching assistants from India can give her more sensitivity to these things, but I'm saying, many of these same things I'm saying are 10 times more true if she were talking about Indian villages. And do you have to talk about, if you were having these same conversations with an Indian group, would you talk about the different, what kinds of groups would people label would we ask of this question?
Hi everyone, my name is Priyanjali or Priya, you can call me either. I'm your TA for this quarter, for this course. I guess in a nutshell, if I were to give you the Indian perspective as someone who grew up there, did high school and then undergrad and then left the country, would be that, I mean, there is the rural-urban divide, so you're right in that sense, like there is a huge, what is akin to the race element here is the caste element there, and what is relevant to the course, I think, is the fact that urban India has been growing significantly in the last 2 decades. If any of you have been there in the last 2-3 decades, you'd see that it's like demographically growing. There are also innovations in urban India, but more of the conventional kind. So you're like smart cities and technologically innovative cities. But the arts and the kind of things that we're trying to explore in this course is very much marginalized. There is enough there's enough caste-based segregation even in cities, and ethnicity-based segregation in cities. So a lot of the themes are actually really similar across the board, from my
But
perspective.
is the term ethnicity not used, or what does it mean, if it means anything in India?
I mean, it's used and it's more complicated because you have different religions. You have like what you would call ethnicity here would be people who come from like the many states. So you have like a state-based identity that is more a proxy for ethnicity there. But people are much more defined by their caste and their religion.
Okay.
So that is the complication.
So the classic answer is CASTE,
Yeah.
caste. And so 50 years ago, castes were very distinctive. Okay.
Yeah.
And in that sense, and I'm really talking about Chicago 50 years ago as well, which defined Chicago or 100 years ago. Not 150 years ago. In the mid-19th century, this was a little white Anglo-Saxon Protestant town, like Los Angeles at the beginning. But then at the end of the 19th century, Chicago was rapidly growing industry, and they were desperately looking for new workers to work on machines, big industrial projects. And so corporations would travel or visit or send emissaries to places especially like Poland, the Ukraine, Italy, Greece. And these were the sources of they weren't called ethnically in Europe, but when they came and arrived here and you were living together with other Greeks, it was called an ethnically different neighborhood for Greek Americans. Okay, so that's the quick, simplified answer of why ethnicity is more salient and more Eastern Europe, and it's not simply 3 or 4 ethnic groups as they have in Boston. Boston has the Italians, the Wasps, African Americans, and the Irish, basically. And politically, they're very distinctive, and fought each other very openly in the late 19th century onward. In Chicago, by contrast, we have 20 different ethnic groups, more than that, but that isn't. We have 20 that are big enough to probably are represented in the Chicago City Council, and they have things like putting dye to make on St. Patrick's Day this last 2 weekends ago, the Chicago River was dyed green because it was St. Patrick's Day. Okay, so the classic ethnic parades and similar activities have made this celebration of the ethnic background, which is carried on and strengthened by the political system. Whereas in Los Angeles, they have a very small number of city council members because they want to eliminate the history of ethnicity and those differences. So if you have 5 or 6 or 10 city council members for a big city, it's now a little bit bigger than Chicago, that discourages the ethnic and the regional and the local neighborhood distinctiveness. Okay. When California was incorporated as a state in the late 19th century, they said we must have elections that are nonpartisan. You can't have a party or the name of a political party or something else which might be, say, the Irish group, and they similarly had the political systems were until recently dominated by city managers and not mayors, and the city managers were typically chosen as engineers, and they would say everywhere, there's neither a Republican or Democratic way to pave a road. It's a right way and a wrong way, and it's an engineering question. Okay, that was the view of government in the classic California nonpartisan image. So these kinds of labels and efforts to reinforce these were fought over, and so you had groups that went around the U.S. and who had tours, they gave speeches, they wrote books, lectures, and they tried to write laws that would reinforce or strengthen one of these other patterns of leadership. Okay. I'm introducing the talk a couple more minutes, then we'll have a break. One quick answer, which I'm reiterating and I'm illustrating with some of the specifics, is one reason that we have so many good studies and carefully detailed studies, because they shock people, but they're different from elsewhere. They violate many of the rules of the game, and we have such politicization. People are very conscious of these kinds of differences, and they write about it, they talk about it, they run for office for it. In Chicago, in ways that they do not elsewhere. But beyond that, within Chicago, neighborhood by neighborhood, these differences are there, so we can contrast with lots of PhDs people have done, where they say, what are the rules of the game in Bridgeport in contrast to Bronzeville? And so the daily Irish Catholic Bridgeport is drastically different from, I've had several students who are African American. I say, why don't you get a job over, I know some people there where they might hire you to work in Bridgeport. I never go to Bridgeport. See, in the past, blacks would be beaten up, shot, etc., literally murdered if they'd go into Bridgeport, etc. So this is minimally true now, but that response, I have had with students, with others who have lived in Chicago enough to say, blacks can't go to Bridgeport. Okay. Um, just one more if you want. Some of my neighbors would say, you know, oh, in Bronzeville, she could never live in Hyde Park. She's too dark. Yes. What proportion are the skin color faces in Hyde Park? White or black, if you will, in those two terms. Are there more whites or more blacks in Hyde Park? See, most of you USC students don't realize that. You were a minority in Hyde Park. People just a little bit north of 55th Street, as you get north and west, this is heavily African American. And you don't realize it right here. Okay. So the Bronzeville, which I stay there in part, Bronzeville, Woodlawn, if we take it east, Bronzeville, Woodlawn, South Shore, and Englewood are national leaders. These are names of neighborhoods now. If we use the general label you had suggested, the South Side covers these kinds of four, and that adds, these four add another dimension of South Side, which is black. And black is more important than the geography, than the public transit, than the temperature, and so forth. The culture which defines nationally American black style comes from Bronzeville and Harlem. These two northern neighborhoods, New York and Chicago, and then people who have been successful in the arts and in Hollywood, they go to Hollywood, and or earlier on, Louis Armstrong, blues, later hip hop, rap, house, and so forth. These are national Hollywood stars. And if you go to Mexico, go to a Mexican city on Saturday night, or many nights if you're in a tourist place, you can have traditional mariachi Mexican music, which the middle-aged and older Mexicans and the foreign visitors like the Americans will go to the music playing the Mexican clubs. Where do the young Mexicans go? I can't say always, but pretty widespread. Same thing in Spain. Where do the young Spaniards go? And what kind of music do they listen to? Comes from Bronzeville. Okay. The teenage gang members make videos they post on YouTube, and they can challenge other people on YouTube, and sometimes they can get killed afterward. Most of the time, now there's a book on this guy, Forrest Stewart. He and I used to bike together all around. I live in Bronzeville, but I bike all over the city and all nearby. It's a fantastic way to get a sense of the big differences neighborhood by neighborhood. Forrest Stewart started to talk to some guys who were making videos, and he got to know them. And one of them said, I'm trying to get, I'm not very good at making it. I can make it here, but I need someone to help me edit it, and who really has the right equipment, the knowledge of how to do all that stuff. And so they found someone, and so Forrest drove more than once with a young guy, black, maybe 25 and 22, and they would drive up to the edge of the Wisconsin border. Upper status, white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, affluent editor who had fancy equipment, and he would make the stuff, he would remove the personable family lifestyle and diversity of the tough guy making the video, and instead they would play up the kind of gun which was in his hands and the way that he would use it and flaunt it, whatever. The book is called The Battle of the Bullet. Ballad, B-A-L-L-A-D, The Ballad of the Bullet. We'll talk about it a little bit perhaps, but if you haven't heard about it, put it down along with Camp and Ballad of the Bullet today. And ethnicity in the world. Okay. Many nationally successful singers, musicians, artists, and dancers have come from Bronzeville, become Hollywood stars, and then they come back and talk in the high schools to encourage students. Okay. Time for a break. They're having a break too. I'm going to stop right there with Jennifer Hudson, and I'll stop with that, her name. Jennifer Hudson, star of the film Dreamgirls. Okay, let's take